Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be here in this city from which Hayek came. I came across Hayek as a young man, and I realized that he had articulated much better everything that I believed in and provided much stronger arguments for them. And the reason we have a Hayek Prize is, of course, that Hayek is one of the most remarkable thinkers of the 20th century. His achievement was to respond to a question, how can we accomplish so much when we, each of us, know so little? And this is a remarkable question. And his answer was that it is because we can utilize knowledge that we do not possess ourselves, knowledge which is acquired in the pre-competitive process and transmitted through traditions and practices. So Hayek really provides us a theory of collective reason, accumulated cultural capital. And it is not only a powerful science research program, it's also a lodestar in politics. And in fact, I think that when we reflect on the last century, we could perhaps use 4 names as abbreviations or descriptions of the 20th century. The first quarter of the century was the age of Lenin, the Bolshevik Revolution. The second quarter was the age of Hitler, Nazism, National Socialism, the war, the World War. The third quarter of the century was the quarter of Keynes. We had the mixed economy in the West. And the fourth quarter was the quarter or the age of Hayek, because what we saw then was that Hayek and Mises were proven right about the collapse of socialism, and we hit the rejuvenation, which is a miracle of a sort, in Central and Eastern Europe and in many other countries around the world, people inspired by Hayek. And I think we don't really understand still how historical this was and how inspired it was by Hayek himself. Now the Hayek Prize is being given, and here you can see 2 of the winners of the Hayek Prize, previous winners. This is Mario Vargas Llosa, the Nobel Prize winner in literature in 2010, and then there are people like Niall Ferguson, Deirdre McCloskey, Peter Thiel, Arthur Laffer, Veselin Vukotic, who got it last year. So we have here an excellent company. And this year, it is Dr. Emilio Pacheco who is going to be the recipient of the Hayek Prize. And I wanted to say a few things about Emilio. We are, of course, old friends. We are schoolmates from Oxford. I was there in 1981 to 85 and got to know him there. And he is my age. We are born in the same year, actually within a month of each other, and in Caracas, Venezuela. And here you can see his degrees. He took a DPhil in political studies at St. Anthony's in Oxford. And he worked for the Institute for Human Studies and for the Central Bank of Venezuela. And then he started working for Liberty Fund and became the president and the chief executive officer. And now he is a senior vice president and the Peer Goodrich resident scholar in Indianapolis. So this is his career. But not only this, he has a wonderful wife and 2 nice daughters. I got to know one of them in Oxford, and the other one I got to know and met in Indianapolis. Isabel, his wife, and his 2 daughters, Isabella and Inés, and he has 5 grandchildren, 3 of them in Tokyo and 2 in Jamaica. So you can see how cosmopolitan Emilio is. And at Oxford, what we did was we formed something called the Hayek Society for the discussion and hopefully development of classical liberal ideas. And here I am with my intellectual mentor Hayek, and he is talking to us about his theories. Emilio was with us this evening when we were discussing this. This is taken in Jesus College, and we went afterwards to a Chinese restaurant called Jian in Banbury Road. And we asked Hayek whether we could actually form the Hayek Society and name it after him. And he rose and gave a short speech and a toast and said, "I'm extremely happy that young people are interested in my ideas and my views and they're discussing them. And I will give you permission to call it a Hayek Society on one condition, that you do not become Hayekians. Because I've noticed that the Keynesians are much worse than Keynes and the Marxists are much worse than Marx. I am afraid, though, that I haven't been all that good in fulfilling this promise that I gave to Hayek in the spring of 1983, because I have followed him closely. I was just thinking about it, though, when I was preparing my remarks here, whether I was perhaps departing from him in some ways. And I think I do, because I am one of the people in Europe who believe in national sovereignty. Hayek, however, he was more of a cosmopolitan, an internationalist of sorts. He had seen his own Austro-Hungarian empire collapse under the strain of nationalism. So he was critical of nationalism. But I think there are two kinds of nationalism, good and bad nationalism, and the small countries of Europe that have chosen to have their own states, I think they are pursuing the good kind of nationalism, but we also know that there is a bad sort as well. So there I part company with Hayek and fulfill my promise to him. And then we formed the Hayek Society, and Hayek was very interested in this, and he wrote to me once and told me that he might be able to meet us in London. He would be in London in the spring of 1985. And this provided a problem for us, because we couldn't take Hayek to a McDonald's. But we were students there, we didn't have many means. So what I did was I wrote to Leonard Litchfield, who at the Institute for Human Studies, who was in charge of the Hayek Fund, and said, "Are you able to support us financially?" And he said, "Of course, yes, I will do that." And that meant that we could reserve a table at the Ritz in London. And we went there, the five of us, and here you can see Emilio talking to Hayek in the spring of 1985, and Hayek was in extremely good mood and told us a lot of stories about his life and all his ideas and his opinions. For example, Hayek he told us a lot about religion. He was very critical of liberation theology in the Latin American countries. It came up because Emilio is, of course, from Latin America. And he said, my conclusion is that there is a contradiction between liberation and liberty, because liberty really requires constraints. It's liberty under the law. And he also said, it's crucial for us, the classical liberals, to try to have a friendly relationship with the church. And then he told us about his discussion with the Pope, and that you can see there. And he said to us, well, I started by saying that we had some superstitions that might be useful for us, useful myths. And the Pope didn't like that. Then I changed and I said, what I'm really meaning is that we should pursue some symbolic truths. And the Pope liked that a lot, when he had changed the name from superstitions to symbolic truths. And Hayek also told us that two examples of things that are not strictly speaking true or rational, but are very useful, are monarchy and the gold standard. And he said, if you cease to believe in it, they will not function as well. But he, of course, he became a British citizen in 1937. And one thing that he told us was, because he had recently been made a companion of honor, he said, I had never had any strong opinion about the Queen. I was invited to Buckingham Palace, but she was extremely graceful and well-informed. And he said that afterwards there was a dinner at the Institute of Economic Affairs with his family and his friends, and he said this was the happiest day of my life when he got the companion of honor from the Queen, and then was able to celebrate with his friends in the evening. He also told us one thing which I find remarkable, and I'm not sure that it has been reported in many places. It is that when he received the Nobel Prize, Solzhenitsyn also received it. He had actually been awarded it before, but he could receive it then in 1974. And Solzhenitsyn said to him, "It is really remarkable, your book, The Road to Serfdom, how good an account it is of the Soviet experience, namely my own experience." And I found that quite interesting. Then we have here three disciples of Hayek. Winston Churchill, as is described in the very informative and interesting book by Professor Klausinger. Winston Churchill, he quoted him in the election campaign of 1945. You expressed some doubt that he had read it, but I'm sure he had. He was such a clever man, Winston Churchill. And Hayek told us that he had only met Churchill once. And Churchill said to him, "You are absolutely right in the road to serfdom, but it will never happen here." But of course that is an illusion, because rot can set in any country. But that's what Winston Churchill said. Then Hayek told us afterwards that he had met personally 4 presidents of the United States. And he said, believe it or not, the first one was Calvin Coolidge. And the reason was that the American Economic Association had a general meeting in Washington, D.C. in 1923, when he was a research assistant of a professor in New York. And Calvin Coolidge invited the whole association to the White House. And then he met Herbert Hoover, but that was long after he had become president. And he said, then I met 2 other presidents, and they were John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan. And the interesting contrast between the 2 of them was that Kennedy was the actor, whereas Reagan was the authentic person. Reagan came to him and said, Professor Hayek, you see, I have read one book of yours. He was not trying to pretend anything. And I read that book, The Road to Serfdom, because everybody told me, you are really saying something similar to that Hayek is writing in his book, The Road to Serfdom. And he also said, I think Ronald Reagan, he didn't have the same mastery of detail as Mrs. Thatcher had, but he was a man of great common sense, and he had very good advisors. Then we come to Hayek's favorite politician, and I must say that there I share his opinion, Margaret Thatcher. He told us at his dinner, where Emilio and I were there after it since spring of 1985, Mrs. Thatcher completely disarmed me. She got to know in September 1979, after she had become Prime Minister in May, that I was in London. And she invited me to lunch at 10 Downing Street. She had only been in office for a few months. And she greeted me at the door, and she said to me, Professor Hayek, I know precisely what you're going to say. You're going to say that I haven't done enough. And you're absolutely right. And this meant Hayek laughed that, he couldn't be very critical of her after that. I think that Mrs. Thatcher was really somebody that he adored, Hayek. He was unsparing in his compliments of Mrs. Thatcher. Then, when the evening drew to an end, there were musicians. There were 3 musicians that walked from one table to another and asked people what songs or tunes they would like to be played. And I said to the musicians, play Vienna, the city of my dreams. There we are. And Hayek was in such good mood. He had had some Burgundy. He told us that Burgundy was his favorite red wine. He had had some Burgundy. He was in such good mood that he burst out singing in German with the music. So, Vienna, the city of my dreams. He told us a lot about the Montpellier Society, and in fact, he had invited me in 1980 to go there. And here you can see Hayek and Mises and some of the other people there. at the Montpellier Society. And there's a Mises table here, and that's the reason I'm mentioning this, in 1947, and I think that was really quite an important thing. And I actually organized a Montpellier Society meeting in Iceland in 2005, and here you can see Emilio Pacheco in Iceland in 2005. So we go a long way back in all these associations and enterprises. But I wanted to say a few words then also about the Liberty Fund, because Liberty Fund has something in common with the Montpellier Society, namely that those two do not have an agenda. They are not marching in a parade. They are, they have, however, a mission. They are a forum for the exchange of ideas. And the mission is, as Pierre Goudry said, to enrich the understanding and appreciation of the complex nature of a society of free and responsible individuals. The Liberty Fund is remarkable in that it leaves advocacy and policy making to other think tanks. And there has to be a division of labor. And somebody has to do the work that Liberty Fund has been doing so well from 1960 when it was established. I had the privilege to attend a lot of the Socratic seminars where there is only one rule, and it is that there is no conclusion. This is a free and flowing discussion. It is a Socratic approach. We are discussing ideas, and there is no demand that we should all be in agreement. The same spirit as Hayek's insistence that we shouldn't be Hayekians. We should be probing. We should use the question mark. And then Liberty Fund, of course, has published a lot of, and not least under Emilio's able leadership, a lot of wonderful books in what I call the conservative liberal tradition. And here you can see a few of us at the Liberty Fund seminar. These are the people from the Hayek Society at Oxford. We were in 1991 attending a colloquium, a Liberty Fund colloquium in Indianapolis. I am there to the left, and then Emilio Andrew Melnick, who's a professor of philosophy, Chandran Kukatas, who teaches in Singapore, John Gray, who was our mentor and protector, you could say, and Stephen Masito at Princeton University. We were the people who operated the Hayek Society in the last years that I spent at Oxford. And what I find so remarkable about the Liberty Fund is the richness of the books in the conservative liberal tradition that they have. They published wonderful books by Hayek, Mises, Smith, Buchanan, Acton, Tocqueville, Constant, Juvenal, Oakeshott, Sumner, and a lot of other very interesting thinkers. And I had this drawing made for my book on them. And Bastiat. Finally, I would like to say one thing about Liberty Fund and about Emilio Pacheco, that they are performing a similar function to that of the monasteries in the Middle Ages that kept alive Western civilization. But it is not a monastery at all. It is a sanctuary. This is the library in Salamanca. The Salamanca school was a classical liberal school. A sanctuary and a forum. And that is, I think, the great strength of Liberty Fund and the able leadership of Emilio Pacheco. And I congratulate Emilio for this honor that is richly deserved, which is an honor shared by him and Liberty Fund, and an honor in the spirit of Hayek. So I would like Emilio to come here and accept the honor.